Yeah. My name is Commander Meagan Flannigan, call sign Vargas. I graduated from the Naval Academy in 2002. So technically, my 4 years of the academy don't count as active duty service, but I was in uniform with an ID card, so obviously it counts. But I did 4 years of the academy, and then I did 11 years on active duty. I transitioned to the reserves. I was in the reserves for a little over 2 years, and then I mobilized back onto active duty for another 2.5 years. And now I'm back in the reserves, and I'll be retiring next year at my 20 years of service.
Wow, wonderful. Well, thank you for your service.
Yeah, back and forth. Yeah, thanks. It's been a good run.
That is. So for the folks that are gonna listen to this, hopefully they're gonna cut my voice out. They won't have to hear me. Can you tell them how? I mean, I know, but can you tell them how you became interested in naval aviation? Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. I feel like it's the story of many children from the 1980s. I made a tent in my family room one weekend night and stayed up when my parents watched an adult movie called Top Gun, and they didn't know I was awake. And I watched it, and I woke up the next morning and declared I am going to be a fighter pilot. I don't really know what that means, but that looked really cool in that movie. So I never wanted to do anything aviation or military related. I actually wanted to be an accountant and go to Notre Dame, and then I saw Top Gun and just kind of fell in love with it. It was love at first sight, and I just said, I don't really know what that is. I just know that that's what I want to do. So that's what sort of sparked the interest. And then I was just lucky that my parents were educators, so they could sort of talk to guidance counselors and figure out how do you do that? Like where do you go to school and how do you get in the Navy and all that kind of good stuff.
How many times when you first watched Top Gun, then how many times did you watch it over and over and over?
Oh my gosh, I definitely once I watched it, because I feel like we had done a VHS recording, it was on TV, but I'm pretty sure we recorded it. And I think I couldn't even tell you. I've watched that movie so many times when I was an adolescent. I just couldn't get enough. It was like the dogfighting scenes are definitely my favorite. Probably followed by singing in the bar, volleyball. But I watched it a lot.
Yeah, I was just telling somebody the other day, I said, I think I've seen Top Gun. I must have seen it hundreds of times because I'm a little older than you, so I'm 45, so my dad took me to see it in the theater, and then of course that's got me started in aviation. Right? I was like, oh my God. And then shortly after that, we had some friends of friends who took us, because my grandparents lived in San Diego, so they took us through Miramar and Top Gun and all that. Yep. And I was like, those people were like gods to me when I was a kid.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's surreal. I hear you, man.
So along the way, did you ever kind of second guess yourself on whether you wanted to be a naval aviator or not? Because you see Top Gun, you're like, oh yeah, that's what I'm going to do. But then along the way, it's a difficult path to get to that point. Did you ever second guess yourself and say, I'm not really sure, I have the talent or capabilities or the smarts to do this? Or
I just it's really funny because I have a twin sister, and I always joke that we're very, very different. But regardless of being a twin sister, I just kind of came out of the womb very confident. So no, I really didn't. Did I have bad flights or bad times where I'm like, oh man, I hope my best is enough. Absolutely. But overall, did I question if I could do it? No. Because once you get into flight school, you could be the top of the class and there might not be any jet spots, right? So you definitely have fears about that kind of stuff. I think in moments of not achieving the absolute perfect thing, yes. But when I was young, I see before I got into Naval Academy, the answer is no. I was just I'm going to do this. There is no other alternative. I am completely dedicated. I know I can do this. I'm smart enough. I'm doing all the right stuff. It's going to happen. And then I think when I got into the Naval Academy and the flight school, the competition just becomes so fierce that you definitely recognize my best might not be enough. And so you just have to reconcile, I'm going to absolutely do the best I can, and that's all I can ask of myself, and the rest of it's luck. It's a lot of hard work, and then it's just getting lucky. When I was in primary flight training, there were no jet spots for 4 or 5 months. They had too many jet pilots stuck in the pipeline, so nobody got jets, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. And then the class before mine, there was one spot, and the kid who got it from the 5 squadrons had a perfect NSF, perfect Navy Standard score. And I said, oh God, this just still isn't good. And then my week, there happened to be 3 across 5 squadrons, but I got one of them. So like, that's about working really hard and then just getting lucky. You know what I mean?
That was completely fortuitous. I mean, because the odds are, I would think, would be so far, like you were talking about the number of spots available, would be so. I mean, the odds are just so much against it that God,
Totally.
That's
no, for sure. Like it's that part of it's intense, and then if you take that all the way through to when I finished flight school, I mean, I obviously saw Top Gun. I fell in love with the F-14. I mean, it was comical when I was at the academy. I'd be getting yelled at my plebe year at tables, and they would say like, "All right, we're going to go on the table, and everyone's going to name a Navy aircraft." And once someone said the F-14, I was like, "Well, I'm out of luck. I don't know any other airplanes." Like, I only knew the F-14. I wasn't just like aviation person who researched all of them. Like, I just had the one. And then to go, have all these weird things happen where my grades were like middle of the pack at the academy. So when I had to pick my flight school date, by the time I picked, it was either you give up some of your leave and you go right after graduation, or you wait 6 months. And I was like, well, I don't want to wait. Like, let's just go now. And if I hadn't done that, like my timing just lined up that I hit everything right when there was no hold up. The jet spots opened. And then I was the very last class that selected F-14s from the Navy. There were 4 of us that selected F-14s, and that was it. The pipeline was dead. Like, so I mean, I just squeaked in there, So that's the luck of it, Some things just fall into place for you.
Yeah, no, that's crazy, and especially since that's all you use the F-14. That's all probably anybody wanted to fly was the F-14. I mean, so
right. He was a beast. The wings moved.
Yeah, like I don't want to fly one of those A4s, like what the heck are those?
I mean, the number one thing everyone was like, please don't get S3s. I don't want S3s. Like, because if you got into jets, that was like the one. Prowlers were at least a little bit better.
Yeah.
But yeah, people wanted pointy nose. That was like the big line in the sand.
And there's got to be, I would imagine, in the Navy, there's got to be like a little bit of a hierarchy, like, oh, you're F-14 or you're fighter pilots versus, you're flying, cargo airplanes, or you're flying P-3s or something.
There's definitely personality and stigma and assumptions made on all of them. Like, I've never met a helo guy who hasn't said, oh, helos are my first choice. Like, helos are what I wanted. I'm like, okay. They all feel like they need to say that. That's probably true for some of them, but a lot of them say that. And you're like, no, it wasn't. Like, people don't want to go into the thing with no ejection seats where the pilots all die and, like, they're in starboard D. They want to be, like, flying the tactical stuff,
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good nature ribbing and, like, crap talking. But a lot of it, too, is just you get different personality types. Like, I was an admiral's aide, and I'll never forget, all the other aides, as soon as you meet someone, you kind of go through a standard spiel of, what's your boss's job? Is he shore-based, sea-based? And, like, what was he? Nuke SWO? Sub guy? Aviator? Jet? Mm-hmm. Because, like, just knowing what they were, it told you so much about probably how they were in the office and, like, what that culture was like. Because they're very different,
Sure.
So, totally.
Wow. That's really interesting. I know that wasn't on the list of questions, but
no, it's fine.
So do you recall the very first time you climbed into an F-14 and what that felt like?
Oh my God, yeah. It's so funny. I get asked this question frequently, and every time I think about it, I get chills in the back of my neck, and it's like, it's sort of like just being back there. But totally. I mean, I remember the first time I even drove into Oceana, and I saw Tomcats in the break. Knowing that I selected Tomcats and I was there to fly Tomcats, just knowing I was going to fly them was enough. But yeah, the first time you climb into an F-14, it's unique. It's a unique situation for, at the time, and there might have been more aircraft like this in the past, but at the time they didn't have any, and they haven't had any since. There were no trainer F-14s. So if you go for your first hop in a Hornet or a Super Hornet, they have a flight trainer, and they'll have a stick and throttle in the front and the back. So you go fly with another pilot, and if you basically goon it away, or there's an emergency or something you can't control, the instructor pilot in the back takes the controls. In the Tomcat, that doesn't exist. Like, you cannot fly a Tomcat without a Rio. You got to have someone in the back seat, and there is no controls back there. So, there's a much more robust sim pipeline before you get in the airplane. And by the time I was doing it, it was old. So, like, it was prone to have emergencies. So you really had to know your stuff before you went in there. So there's that piece of it. But so there's a lot of build-up before you actually get into the airplane. not to mention just like 14 years of build-up, dreaming about the thing. But the thing I remember most is just the first time, you know, I think it might have been on the second flight of the syllabus, but you do something called a zoom climb, and you go to 500 feet out over the ocean. You go to full afterburner, basically go as fast as she's going to go at that altitude, and you park the nose at 70 degrees nose up, and you would maintain that attitude until you hit 350 knots. And when you slowed to 350, you would roll over and level off. And I mean, you're going up to like 35,000 feet. It was just a rocket, you know? Like, I mean, it was just insane. And you're there, and the wings are back, and you're just zooming up into the sky, and it's unbelievable. Like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe I'm looking over my shoulder and seeing a Tomcat in my rearview mirrors. You know what I mean? I've been dreaming about this thing since I was 10. I'm 24. Holy shit, you know? So, and you also, I think, have at the time, you don't have a fear, but as a, you know, more mature adult now, I can say it's a lot to build up something in your mind for 14 years, what you think it's going to be like, and the sacrifice and the hard work and the, you know, just everything you put in to get there. That there's definitely a possibility that there's a letdown, right? Like, how does it meet your expectations? But you really don't have to worry about that when you're talking about that F-14 Tomcat, because it totally meets the expectation. You know, it's just amazing. It was spectacular. Yeah.
I mean, man, imagine. I mean, there has to have been so much simulator time too prior to, you know, prior to taking that first flight.
Yeah. In the Tomcat, I'm pretty sure we did 17 2-hour sims. And I mean, you'd have to go in there, and they're like, all right, today's your hydraulics simulator. And I mean, you would have to basically draw the hydraulic system on the board, and then you would get in you get in the sim, and you would go through every single hydraulic emergency procedure you can imagine, you know, and you basically did that for all the systems. In the Hornet, when I was an instructor, I think they did like 8 sims, and then they were in the airplane, and the sims were like an hour long, you know, and it just was not anywhere near as robust because you had this get out of jail free card with the instructor in your back seat. In the Super Hornet and the Hornet were just exponentially easier to fly, so you just didn't have to have as firm of a grasp of the airplane. So there's a lot of prep, which is great. Like, they make you feel very much prepared and ready to do it, right? But it just kind of adds to the build-up and the anticipation.
God, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about the F-14 and your just kind of general thoughts on the airplanes, on the airplane itself, kind of some of the strengths, the weaknesses, the likes, dislikes?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's obviously, it's a big, fast airplane, and it was built for air-to-air intercepts, you know, with Soviet airfighters, right? So it's really good at that. If you look at sort of the tactics you see today, it's a really good supersonic fighter tactic air-to-air kind of system. So it really excels there. And then it was retrofitted to make it a strike fighter, right? To make it a bomber. So the air-to-ground systems on it weren't bad, but they were sort of an aftermarket retrofit, if you will. So really where the airplane was super fun was in the air-to-air arena when you're doing, you know, long-range intercepts. Dogfighting, if you look at like Super Hornet and Hornet, when you get into these like, you know, just computerized systems, there's a lot of advantages and much better in a high AOA, like slower speed fights. But the Tomcat was just fun. Like, it was an airplane where there wasn't auto throttles or there wasn't auto trim. You know, if you're in a dogfight, slow speed, and you wanted to go left, that might mean you needed right stick, left rudder, or like some weird combination, right? Like, you had to really know the airplane, which is when you transition into the Super Hornet and the Hornet, everything is so automated, it's so advanced that you just put the stick where you want to go, and the computer's like, and it like figures out what control surfaces need to go where to get you there. So you don't have to be as in tune with the airplane. So I think that's what I liked about it. It really forced you to, you know, see the pants, understand the plane. And, you know, when I was Tomcat flying, like just flying formation, you know, flying with using rudders and using like every control surface basically you had available to you to get the airplane to do what you wanted. Whereas in the Hornet and the Super Hornet, again, it's just more, you know, put the stick where you want it to go and it's going to figure it out. But as I transitioned to the Super Hornet and the Tomcat was sundown, I looked at, you know, tactics we're flying, you know, you're just like, oh my gosh, the Tomcat would destroy these tactics because it was just such a fast airplane. I didn't realize how fast it was until I got into an F-18. And relatively speaking, especially a Super Hornet, I think it's kind of a slug. It's pretty slow. Again, relatively speaking. So it was just the speed, and like if you were doing air-to-air stuff, you felt really confident in the airplane's ability to respond and get you where you needed to go. And we had these great weapons, use the Phoenix and everything else. So that's where its strength lies. That's where the strengths really lies for the airplane. But that being said, I mean, when I deployed, we did all close air support. Obviously, nothing air-to-air, and it's not like it wasn't effective as an air-to-ground fighter either. Like it did great in that realm, and they really did adapt it quite well with the different pods and the different weapons we carried. So, just as effective as the Super Hornets and the Hornets that were out there, which is great. Just, some of the stuff was probably a little bit easier, and some of the stuff was a little bit harder. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Was there much, when you're up there, Chris, you're flying your dream airplane, kind of, once you're up there kind of goofing off. You can kind of do what you want. Like, let's see how fast it can go today, or, let's try this, or.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, because you have currency hops, right? When you're just like, hey, we're going to be doing night flying, so I got to have this number of flights in, this amount of time, or whatever it is. So you just have times where they basically give you the keys and they're like, hey, just go burn an hour and do whatever you want. And when you're doing that, that's when you're like, all right, let's see how high I can go. Let's see how fast I can go. Let's see, you know what I mean? And you're just, it's totally street legal. You're out in the military area, so you're just seeing what she could do, The Tomcat was just really fun and really fast. It was really, I use this analogy all the time, but it's because it's so effective at describing it. When you think of an F-14, like think about getting your driver's license at age 16, and your dad's like, here you go, buddy, 1976 Chevelle, muscle car. It doesn't have automatic windows. It doesn't have power steering. It doesn't have a cool radio, but like it is fun. It's powerful. It sounds cool when you turn the engine on, and it just kind of got this like sex appeal to it, right? It's got this charisma, and then like that's the first car you have, and you love it. And then your dad's like, hey, the oil's leaking all the time. It's not reliable enough. So here's a 2021 Audi A6, and you're like, hey, it's fast. It's cool, it's all automated and Gucci, but it just kind of doesn't have the same thing, it doesn't have the same charisma. Yeah. And that's totally what it is to go from an F-14 to an F-18. Like, both are really cool, but one of them just has something that's hard to define, and that was the Tomcat. And when we transitioned as a squadron from an F-14 squadron to an F-18 squadron, our squadron wasn't even really the same once we were flying F-18s. Like in the F-14, we were going to the officer club every Wednesday, every Friday. That was part of the culture. People are partying, having fun, like basically work hard, play hard mentality, like into shenanigans, just kind of having fun with the other squadrons. And that still exists, but just it's not like it did in the Tomcat squadrons. Like the Super Hornet squadron was not quite the same.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not because, because that, that. Like the airplane, the like you were mentioning before, the build up into that thing. It must be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can. Yeah. It must have been kind of a little bit, surreal. It's like, hey, I've spent,
totally.
Since I was 10 years old thinking about this, this surreal experience. Am I actually in this thing? Like, wow, am I dreaming?
Oh, big time, big time. And then like the other piece of that, if you peel back the onion on it, is, you see a movie when you're 10, and it's, guys playing volleyball and driving motorcycles and being ridiculous and flying these cool airplanes and all, like, and the movie touches on a little bit, but then you go to flight school, you learn how to fly, and then you realize I'm spending the first, my time in the RAG. They're obviously teaching you how to fly the airplane, but more importantly, they're teaching you how to use it as a weapon, right? So then you have to get your mind around, I'm joining my squadron and now I'm getting ready for deployment. And what does that mean? Like, this isn't about doing flybys and, playing volleyball and doing all this other stuff. It's about being in our military forces, and providing close air support and providing support to ground troops who are incredibly more danger than we are. And sort of getting your mind around what that means and what that feels like and what the reality of it is. And that's a part of it, right? Because it goes way beyond what that childhood expectation or dream was into the reality of why we have the airplanes and what they're there to do.
Right. Yeah. There's not the there's not
totally.
Danger Zone playing in the background and
right. Right. Exactly. We might be singing it to ourselves.
Yeah. I like where I saw some interview with somewhere, I can't remember which one you did, because you've given so many interviews where you said basically there's two types of Navy pilots. What was it, the people who admit that they joined because of Top Gun, and
yeah, and ones who lie.
And then the ones who lie, yeah. I was like, oh my god, that's got to be so true.
So true. Some people try to act cool about it. I'm like, no. I'm just going to be honest. It was all Top Gun.
And I was actually talking to a guy the other day. He runs this Facebook group about Top Gun props and stuff, and he's done like a lot of research on this, and he told me after Top Gun, enlistment went up like 500%.
Oh yeah,
in the
Navy.
Navy.
It was like the most successful recruiting that the military ever had.
Oh yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what happens after Top Gun Maverick comes out, if it actually comes out sometime in the near future.
I know. I keep waiting for it. Now I see they pushed it back to November again. I'm like, oh my god, because my daughter's 7, so like I want to take my daughter to see it now.
Exactly. Trust me, my kids are going.
Yeah. So what would how would you describe landing on a carrier, and specifically kind of what it's like at night? Because everybody wants to know that, of course, what that whole experience is like.
At first I'd say daytime isn't horrible. Like daytime, if you're a really good ball flyer, is like fun. If you're me, I was always sort of like an average to mediocre ball flyer. Like that wasn't my strongest suit. So I would say day traps weren't horrible. Night traps are fairly unpleasant. I mean, I think even the best people don't like night traps, because especially if there's, and I will say you become acutely aware of the cycle of the moon. Because if you get a full moon, a night trap's kind of like just an easy day trap because it's a straight in, right? Because at nighttime we do K3 recovery, which means we're lined up back behind the carrier. You just do this nice long straight in, which lines you up really well at the start when you're landed. And if you're doing daytime, obviously you're in the pattern. So just a little bit, just different, but K3 basically is full moon isn't horrible, but new moon, I mean, it's what you would expect, where it's just pitch black and it's pitch black and it's pitch black, and then you just get this little tiny ball, and it's dark, and you don't have great depth perception. If you get into like bad weather at night with storms and pitching decks, like forget about it. That just ups the how challenging it is. And you got to remember too, when you go on deployment, you're doing these night we basically had, I think, 4 different times that we would do these sorties into Iraq. But you'd either get like the morning go. If you went in the morning, you would take off and land in the daytime. But then everything else was some portion of the night. So you would either take off in the morning and land at night, or you would take off and land at night. So, you're doing these long flights. You're on night vision goggles. Like it's dark. You're exhausted. And then you're coming back and you're doing a night trap, and for me, like I would have to go through I had a very strict dehydration regimen I would do because I couldn't pee in the airplane, and we'd be doing long flights. So I basically like dehydrate myself the whole flight, which when you dehydrate your eyes, obviously your eyesight's one of the first things that goes. So I would basically start drinking water 45 minutes prior to landing just to get some, start to rehydrate myself and hopefully wouldn't pee my pants before I landed. But night trap, there's no good way to spin it other than they're just hard and they're scary. And I don't care if you're like the toughest, coolest fighter pilot guy. There's not one of them that hasn't been in the seat, landing at night, and have a scary night and have a scary past and just scare the crap out of themselves. Like it's not hard to do because it's a really, really hard skill, and it's what breaks us out from a lot of other military forces. And it definitely is what breaks us out. People are like, oh, Air Force or Navy. And you're like, you want to do the hardest thing in the airplane, it's in the Navy. Because the hardest thing you can do in an airplane is land on a carrier at night. There's nothing more challenging than that. So until you do that, you basically, like, Air Force guys can only talk so much crap because they haven't landed on the boat. And that's the hardest thing to do.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's got to be absolutely just terrifying, actually. I mean, not even having never, done anything like that. I can only imagine. I mean, just it just sounds terrifying. Just even thinking about it, imagining it, and seeing.
Totally, and you can just get in your head, right? Like, and that's what happened to me. I did great in my initial carrier quals in the Tomcat. I did awesome, like no problem qualifying. I did fine through workups, and then towards my end of workups, and then the beginning of my deployment, I just had hit like I had one night where I had my first wave off, and it was really shitty weather, and I got a wave off. And like, which is pretty like not good, right? It just means you're coming, like something that they're seeing is too out of norms, and they wave you off because, like sometimes they'll wave you off early, but normally like they're waving you off because they need to get enough power on the jet so that you're not doing something dangerous, right? But I had my first wave off, and it just got in my head, and you can really play head games with yourself because so much of both, like there's obviously a lot of technical skill involved, but I would really argue that the majority of it is headspace. It's mental. So like if you get into a rut and you just beat yourself up, then you're focusing on it, right? And it doesn't matter if you are the best person at dogfighting, if you hit the target every single time, none of that matters because nobody sees that. All they see is when you come back and land. And when you land, there's a camera on the flight deck. It records every single landing. Every ready room has it up 24 hours a day. So if you come back and you have a bad landing, every single person saw it on the flat cam. You know what I mean? And just the competitive nature of the people, the entire environment, it's just, you can really get yourself into a place where you mentally can't get out of it. And I mean, I got into that space big time when I was on deployment. And I had to kind of have to come to Jesus with my sister because I was just like, oh my God, I cannot get myself out of this. And I feel like I'm letting everybody down, you know? And she did just like, whatever she said something that was what I needed to hear. And then literally like the next day, I was doing fine. And I didn't have an issue with landings after that. You know, it lasted for it was like the last 3 months of workouts, first 3 months of deployment, like really inconsistent, really struggled. And then one day my head just said, dude, stop doing this. Like, you know how to do it. Go do it. So I think that's the really hard part. You know what I mean?
Are the your peers, you know, pilots and people aboard the carrier? I mean, are they pretty supportive of that, or are they, you know, if you get a wave off, and you know, are they razz you? And I mean, you meant obviously.
I mean, I would say there's good nature razzing. You know what I mean? And there's a lot I think there's a lot of intent of that, and it depends on your command, and it depends on your air wing. But like, I'll be candid and say some of the razzing that I got was well beyond what I think is anywhere near appropriate. Mm-hmm. And you could argue why all you want. I was the only female pilot on my carrier. So I was the only female Tomcat pilot in the world. So do I think that additional spotlight played a part? Sure. Do I absolutely own that I was having a hard time? 100%. Like there's a lot of guys who will be like, oh, no, I was fine. And I'm like, no, dude, I was struggling. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it is what it is. But my really close friends, sure, were supportive. But there were some people who made it exponentially worse. And then you're on deployment and you're isolated and you don't have, like back then, it's not like you could call all the time. You know, you would have to wait to get on the computer. So it's hard to get that support from home. Oh yeah. I mean, I'll be candid and tell you there was more than one time that someone would say something that was just so wrong that me, who had built up a pretty big shield and like defensive resilience, would just be in my room, like, in tears, just like, I can't believe this is, you know, these are some of the people I'm working with. There are also some really great people, don't get me wrong, but I think when it comes to landings, it's an unforgiving group of people. Mm-hmm. And there's an expectation that you are good, and there is not a lot of, there's just, some people take it too far. And I think the people who do take it too far are doing it because they have their own, like as a 41-year-old woman, right, I can look back on that now, and the people that were really bad, I can see were really caught up in their own insecurities and their own BS. Right. And that's how they chose to deal with it. And even as like a 24, 25-year-old woman at the time, I probably had the rational mind to recognize that. But when you're so caught up in your own, like when you're in such a bad place already, you can't rationalize that. You know what I mean? You just see people who should be in your corner because they're on the same team as you, who aren't. And that can be really devastating. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And I will say, like, things like that make me, I mean, you know, there's a tremendous amount of resiliency and mental fortitude that comes out of that. Like, I think I've been highly successful in a lot of other endeavors in my life because I went through that kind of crucible experience and, like, felt that. And it's also made me, I think, a much better person that when I see other people struggling, I really have a different perspective on it. And so I try to really always treat other people. I mean, people say it all the time, but I genuinely, I really try to treat other people the way I want them to treat me. Because I think people get wrapped up in wanting to be the cool guy, wanting to be the funny guy, wanting to fit in with these people, you know, for whatever reason. And they say and do things, especially on deployment, where you don't have societal inputs, you know what I mean? So when you're away from your family and you're away from people that keep you grounded, people will start to say and behave and do things that they would not do at home. And in some ways that can be good. Like if you're at war, that can help you kind of compartmentalize and get into a certain mindset. It can also just bring out behavior that otherwise you would not see. So there's good and bad stuff to that.
That must have been so difficult so you're the only female pilot in the world in terms of everybody's expectations of you. And then, that's just kind of adds insult to injury. With everything else you're going through, it's like, look, I'm a woman too, and I've got to, work twice as hard as the men do, because this is such it's the total, everybody would, male occupation is how everybody would probably look at it,
Yeah. No, there's, and I would say there was legitimately a lot of pressure and a lot of people watching, but I would say all of it paled in comparison to the pressure I put on myself. I put a tremendous amount of pressure on myself to represent all women. I was like, I've got to be perfect. I've got to be, so when I didn't have a perfect landing, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm literally letting down the entire gender of women in the world. I cannot believe this. And I was doing that to myself. There definitely weren't men who were like, you're making all women look bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was stuff I was putting on myself. I was dealing more with, guys saying, when you saw Top Gun, you shouldn't have wanted to be a pilot. You should have just wanted to have sex with pilots. You're just like,
wow.
And they weren't using those words. You know what I mean? And you're just like, really, Dan? I'm sorry I beat you in that dogfight today. Okay, sorry, not sorry. Get over yourself. So, yeah. You name it. I probably encountered. It was early 2000s, mid 2000s. So, there was still some meat on the bone in regards to what people were allowed to say and do in the workplace. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Now, were you married at the time then?
No, I was single.
Oh, okay.
And it's interesting you say that though, because I was willing to put up with. I got stuff wrong at the beginning in the sense that I really wanted to fit in, right? I really wanted to assimilate and fit in with all of these guys in my squadron because I knew I was the only woman and I was already getting a lot of attention about that. So I went sort of above and beyond of laughing at the dirty jokes and not being offended. Always really I'm not offended. I'm not the girl that's offended. I'm going to fit in. But that's not sustainable and that's not realistic because if you're a woman trying to fit in and act like a guy, you're not a guy.
Right.
It doesn't matter how long you pretend to. So point being, I was single. And then I started dating this great guy who I'm now married to. Been together for, 15 years or something now. And and his dad was an Air Force officer, so he'd grown up military brat, lived all over the place. And I would come back and just say, oh, this happened at work today. Someone said this in the squadron. And I would think nothing of it. And he would literally stop dead in his tracks and be like, what? What? That is not normal and that is not okay. And I'd be like, oh, I guess you're right. I'd become so accustomed to it and and I was trying so hard just not to be offended by anything that I really just sort of turned off all of my, receptors on that stuff. So it was good to have that sounding board, but at the same time, I got a lot of courage to finally say, hey, I don't need to pretend not to be offended by stuff that's offensive. I don't need to do that. And so I started giving more pushback when that stuff would happen. But I also was just a really direct. I hit a point where I couldn't communicate that in any kind of tactful way. So it made my last year, it made some of my time in those squadrons much harder because I now was giving pushback, which, as you can imagine, doesn't necessarily make it any easier. You know what I mean?
Right.
Regardless if I was right or not, it still makes it harder. So, so it was just interesting because when I started dating him, he was more offended than I was. And having that confident response from a strong man who has a lot of character and integrity, I got a lot of strength from that to be able to say, you're right, some of this stuff isn't where it should be. And I'm going to, and then I had to learn as a professional, and this as an adult, of how can I assert myself in situations where, people will hear me and it will influence change and change the way people are talking to one another.
Right.
And I did it wrong a ton, but I definitely learned. I got a lot better at it. You know what I mean? And I can't emphasize enough. There are so many fantastic guys that I work with. There are so many great people, but it only takes a couple of really, really unkind people to have a really big impact on someone's existence. You know what I mean? So that was just my experience for a while. I had a couple of people that were just not good human beings. They just weren't good people. That I let have a lot of impact on me. And I learned a lot from that too. I tell young kids, and they talk to me all the time about what do you do when you face adversity, and how what do you do in all these situations? And like the biggest thing I've learned from that time in my life is that people only have the power over you that you give them. Like I let those people get in my head. I decided to care what they were saying. That was on me. Yes, like they were responsible for what they were saying, but I couldn't ignore them. And now, like I don't give that type of sentiment like 2 seconds of my time. Like I don't care at all. It has zero impact to me. You know what I mean?
Right.
I didn't have that. I didn't have the ability to turn that off back then.
Yeah.
Because you're living it. It's work. Like you have no work-life balance because you're with your squadron all day and then you're partying with your squadron all weekend. Like they're your friends, you're your coworkers, they're your family. Like it's just nonstop, and it's not a healthy thing. So you learn a lot from it. There's a lot more than just the flying. There's the unit and like the cohesion of that unit and what that looks like. And there's a lot of ego, and there's a lot of who's the best and who's better and who's worst. And, you got to figure out how you want to play those situations out, and how you're going to let them impact you and what you're going to take away from them. So,
yeah. Well,
no regrets.
I was always partial to the old philosopher, Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. I always like the quote he said. He said, if you're distressed by anything external, the pain's not due to the thing itself, but your own estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. I thought, that's so true. And that's exactly in line with what you were saying.
Yeah. So we got a little deep there. Got into the some ideology stuff there, but that's a big part of it. And I'll be candid and tell you, there's a lot of reasons I decided to leave active duty, but one of them was I wasn't seeing enough change in the way people treated one another, and I just was like, I'm not doing this anymore. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna there's just some people you can't win, and you got to pick your battles and say, what's most important to me. A big part of it was I wanted to have more kids, and I couldn't keep out on active duty.
Yeah.
I had to go back on deployment, so that was the leading reason. But honestly, if that wasn't a factor, I probably would have gotten out anyway. I was ready for a different work environment.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't believe you. So how would you compare the egos of most naval aviators to that in Top Gun?
I would say, it's really fascinating, and I would tell people all the time, and they kind of laugh, and they say no. Like, when I joined my squadron, there was a couple guys that were sort of exactly what you'd think, that are like, I always joke, there's one guy, I won't name him, but he'll laugh if he ever hears this. I know I'm talking about him. But he was the guy that you walk into a bar, pick his nose, fart, and have something in his teeth, and every woman in that bar wanted to sleep with him. Just some guys had it, right? They were this the charismatic guy, good looking, great sticks, athletes, the whole thing, and people just wanted to hang out with them. There's definitely that. But I would say that was just as rare. There was probably a couple of people like that. The rest, for the most part, I saw a lot. There's definitely people like me. There are definitely people like me who are like, I've been doing this my whole life, and this is all I ever wanted to do. And some of them were really into, aviation before they joined. They were already pilots. But I'm going to tell you, honestly, there's a lot of people there that just have something to prove. There's a lot of people there that weren't the coolest kid in high school, you know what I mean? And now they're and you can always tell when you meet a fighter pilot where they fall in, because, most people meet me and they'll be like, oh, were you in the Navy? I'm like, yeah. Oh, what'd you do? I'm like, I was a pilot. Oh, what'd you fly? It's not, and then there's other fighter pilots, you meet them, they're like, I got to think of a call sign that's not someone in my squadron because they'll know I'm talking about that. I don't know anybody with the call sign of Care Bear. So we'll say, you meet some fighter pilots and they're like, hey, I'm Care Bear. And you're like, what do you mean? Oh, I'm a fighter pilot. It's my call sign. You know what I mean? If they're leading out with that and they're introducing themselves by their call sign and they're immediately bringing up the fact that they fly F-18s or F-14s in the first 5 sentences, that tells you a lot about their ego. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It tells you they're getting a lot of validation from that. If you meet somebody who you have to ask 5 questions to get to that, it's probably something that they really enjoy doing and fulfill them, but it doesn't define who they are. You know what I mean? So there's definitely a lot of ego. There's a lot of wanting to be the best. And a lot of that's really good. A lot of that spurs competition. It spurs you to be a fantastic pilot and push yourself and be able to really get stuff done when you need to, when you're in combat. So I think in a lot of ways, it's a very good thing. It's a good motivator. I think you can turn to the obnoxious, toxic side at some point, but that's true, of most things. But I would say there's there's definitely a lot of ego. And it's funny, I think it was one of your questions later, but You know, if you look at the documentary Speed and Angels, when they first started making that, you know, I remember the director was making it about the adversary pilots, and the adversary pilots came to Key West to support a debt for the RAG when we were there in the Tomcats. And so she just started talking to the students, and I was like, I don't have anything to do with this. Oh my God, please God, get this camera. Like, I don't want to be anywhere, like nowhere within 20 feet of this camera. And then, you know, she jumped in a van that I was riding in, and, you know, that scene's actually in the documentary. The point being, she then realized I need to talk to the students, because that's what the story is, because they're so excited. They're at the beginning, they're green, you know, all this great stuff. And then she starts talking to all the students. But if you ask her why she picked me and why she picked Jay she picked because Jay was great on camera, but like Jay had this remarkable story, right? And has a lot of passion, and like he was picked for those reasons. But she always tells me, she's like, Meagan, I picked you because I would be interviewing the guys and say like, oh, how'd your flight go? And they'd be like, oh, you know, I did this and this, it's pretty cool. And like, we're kind of putting on this show, and she would interview me and be like, how'd it go? I'd be like, I don't know, I got my ass kicked. It was really cool though. Like, I didn't really care about, I was like, why do we have to try to put on a show and act like we're cool? We're fighter pilots. Can't we just embrace the moment?
You're just cool by default. You know, you're a fighter pilot. I mean, really.
Come on. If we're still fighting to prove we're cool and we're flying Tomcats, I just don't understand what's left. Like, what are you trying to achieve that you haven't already achieved? Like, I was very comfortable just being like, shit, man, this is awesome. Like, this is so fun. And I totally got my ass handed to me, but who cares? Because it was in a Tomcat. Like, I didn't care as much, you know? And, like, I obviously I had, like, a tough time when I was in deployment. But, like, even my head paddles, he used to tell me, you know, they would pick who they would debrief at, like, the end of each line period. Like, you have 3 or 4 paddles in and there's people, paddles are the LSOs who do your grades and your landing. And, you know, in the line period, so, like, they break it up, you know, each deployment you'd have, like, 3 line periods where it's just, like, a set of grades, and then they restart the grades. And at the end of them, they will debrief all the pilots in the squadron. So each of them have to debrief, like, 3 or 4 pilots. And he used to tell me all the time, he's like, I always want to debrief you because, like, you might be, like, at the bottom of our squadron. You might not be the best ball player, but you are so receptive. Like, you're not defensive. You don't try to argue with me and tell me you're wrong. You just want to get better, and you just listen and you learn. And there's other people who are much better ball players than me, but my God, if they had one pass that wasn't graded well, they acted like 5-year-olds. And that's ego. You know what I mean? And I just think I didn't have that. I didn't have an ego problem. And, you know,
I noticed that in the
long answer, there's a lot of ego.
In the film, you know, when they'd be giving you instructions, all you'd say is yes sir, and like you know, very few words. I thought, like, that was great. I mean, because it would be easy to get defensive or be like, hey, right. You know, I'm flying F-14s, you know, I mean, really, you know, I mean.
Right, but you're not going to get better if if you can't hear, you can't listen, you're too wrapped up in your own ego, and that definitely, like, that is there. Trust me, that's there.
Can you talk a little bit about, kind of switching gears a little bit, about Operation Iraqi Freedom, kind of when you learned that you'd be joining the operation, and kind of some of the challenges of the mission, and when you first heard about it, and
Yeah, I mean, I was in the Naval Academy when 9/11 happened. I was in my senior year, so we were the first class to graduate, you know, right after that. So we knew, I would say, if anything, like, we knew we'd be doing something in Iraq. For pilots, we were more just like, oh shit, like, we're going to miss the fight. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to be over before we get there, so you got to go through flight school. So the fact that it was still going on when we hit the fleet, you know, we knew that was absolutely coming, and we were excited and prepared, right? Because at that time, it's crazy to think of it now, 20 years later, but there was definitely a fear of, like, the war will be over before I get there. Like, I won't see any combat. And as someone who, like, when you go into the military, it's this weird conundrum where you're like, I don't want to go and kill people, right? But I also am going to train to do something really hard. And what do you want to do after you train? You want to execute, right? You want to have the opportunity to exercise the skills that you have learned. So, like, people want to have that combat experience. It's part of, you know, the military. Now, it's sort of comical to think any of us thought that back in 2001, 2002, because, you know, obviously it's been going on for so long. But so we knew it was coming. You do a lot of workups to prepare, and then, you know, our deployment, you basically would go into country every other 2 days or so. Like we talked about earlier, the flights are pretty long. So you basically would, you would take off. We always have I'm trying to remember. We have 2 sections take off. One section will be the combat section. The other section will be the airborne spare. So you basically take off, rendezvous with your flight lead. you'd say, hey, we're up and up, like all systems go, or you don't. And if one of your systems isn't working, then one of the airborne spares would basically jump in and take your spot. And then as soon as you're good to go, you would go hit the driveway, which is basically just a long air nav into Iraq. So you'd fly for like an hour and 15, hour and a half, and you'd hit your first tanker. So you'd go hit like a KC-130 or KC-135, refuel, and then you go to your first of 2 kill boxes. So kill boxes are just like a big grid over the country, just like you'd see anywhere else. So like 88 Alpha Sierra, 94 Alpha Quebec, like just grids that would take you over certain cities and certain areas. So you'd check in, you basically get overhead, you check in with the ground crew, the controllers, and just say, hey, you've got, 2 Tomcats, you've got this weapon, we're here for this long, what do you got? And a lot of times it was pretty mundane stuff, right? Like it's just, hey, we've got a convoy, just keep an eye on them. They're, you have charts, and they'd say like, route red and then route orange, just like look out in front, like just be, bird's eye view kind of thing. Most of the flights were incredibly boring. Especially on the driveway in and out. There's a lot of Sudoku. There's a lot of words, crossword puzzles, that kind of stuff, which is weird because you're like, it's just catch-22 where you're like, I want to have an exciting flight. I want to like drop bombs and do all this stuff. But if you're doing that stuff, then people on the ground are in harm's way. So you really don't want that, right? You want your flight to be really boring. But, that's generally what it was. So you'd spend about an hour and a half, and then you say, hey, go hit another tanker. So you'd refuel again. You go hit another kill box for about an hour and a half. You hit a tanker, and then you fly the driveway home. And that's when I'd start drinking water. I'd get my Rice Krispie treats, Scooby snack, and then get ready for the night trap. So the flights are about 6 hours, like 5.5 to 6.5 hours long. And like I would tell you, I did 33 missions, and I'd say 30 were probably pretty boring. On one that was literally socked in, so I was just flying around the goose the whole time, got struck by lightning, like just weird stuff. But I feel like everybody has at least a couple of flights where, you get that call that you're sort of waiting for the whole time of, we've got troops in contact. We need you to get over here and get over here really fast. So as soon as you hear that, your heart kicks up and you're like, okay, this is real stuff. Not like real stuff in the movie or real stuff in the sim or real stuff in training. Like this is real stuff. And you check in, and when I had one flight where I released ordnance, and I had one flight that I actually think of as more memorable where I did it. But I checked in with the group, and they were in Baghdad, and we were being relayed, but we couldn't even talk to them. They didn't have the right radio. So it was being relayed through another controller. And they were just like, this unit's completely pinned down. They cannot figure out where the enemy troops are. And we're like, we've got this ordnance. We can try, and they were just like, it's danger close. Like, they don't know where they are. You just need to figure out where they're at. So immediately we get overhead, and we're like, hey, they're north or wherever they were. Like, we found them right away. We're like, they're right here. Our troops can evac this direction. What do you need? Because we're just like, you're there. And you're like, put me in, coach. I'm ready. I'm ready to rain the fire, do whatever we see in the movies, But they're basically like, hey, we just need a show of force. And a show of force is literally a flyby. Like, you come down super low, and you scare the crap out of the enemy. And you're basically, it's like a warning pass. You're like, Big Brother's here, we're watching, and the next one isn't going to be without ordnance. You know what I mean? And it's pretty effective. So we literally come down, we do just like high-speed flyby, kick out some flares, and sure enough, like, enemy starts to go the opposite direction because they knew what was going to come next, and our troops were able to evacuate. And it was like, it's one of those moments in my life where I'm like, I didn't have to take life, I didn't have to release ordnance, but I was able to save lives. You know what I mean? Like, if we hadn't been there that day, more people would have died on the ground. And that was our mission. So that's a powerful thing to be a part of, And they were like I said, I had 2 or 3 flights that were like that, 2 or 3 only out of all that training and all those years and that long deployment. But honestly, it doesn't matter, because if you're there and you can help one of our service members on the ground, then that's all worth it. You know what I mean? So.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, great life experience. Yeah.
It must have been kind of strange flying over. I mean, you're in an area, because I've never been to travel to the Middle East before. I mean, it's kind of the cradle of civilization. You're here, you're fighting a modern day war with modern day technology, and I can imagine you're flying by these ancient monuments, and the desert that's millions of years old.
Yeah.
That totally must kind of go through your mind too, that like, geez.
Oh yeah, totally. And especially when you fly over some of the airfields and you see like there'd be like broken old MiGs or like weird tanks, and there's just like weird stuff around. You know what I mean? And it's honestly like part of it's pretty. Like you're flying around some of these towns, and there are these like beautiful mosques and like these gorgeous mountains, and you know it makes you sad too because there's some real beauty there that obviously is just devastated by war for decades and decades. So there's a lot to absorb in all of it for sure.
Mm-hmm. God, yeah. I just thought, yeah, that must have been just fascinating.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
I'm just gonna skip the Speed Angels because you kind of talked about that a little bit about how that came about, and so what attributes do you think, kind of switching gears again, what attributes do you think make a good pilot? Mm-hmm.
It's funny. I saw that question. I was trying to think of like. I mean, you know, like I used to joke that the guy that I was joking that could like fart and pick his nose and all the girls would still want to sleep with him. He was a great stick, but he used to joke. He's like, you know, if being a fighter pilot was as prestigious as being like an NFL player or something, he's like, none of us would be here. Like none of us would be good enough to be pilots because if you look at sort of, you know, it's not that. It's weird. I don't want to. What's it called? I don't want to minimize how hard it is, right? Because it's hard. It's also, I just don't think you have the same number. Yes, I need a lot of people who are like, oh, I saw Top Gun, I want to be a fighter pilot too. But do they actually really try to be a fighter pilot? No. Like, so I think if a lot of people actually pursued it, it's just about like the same stuff you would always expect, but just listen. Like, keep your mouth shut, learn, don't have an ego. You know, yes, have good hand-eye coordination. Like, I would say that don't have, I have horrible hand-eye coordination. I almost chopped my thumb off with an axe. Like, I don't have good hand-eye coordination. I would say it's more being able to multitask, right? It's being able to do multiple things at once. It's being able to just blanket memorize an emergency procedure and spit it out and do those things without even thinking while you're still processing a lot of other information. And there's no way to train for that or to know, like, what that looks like in a layman without putting them in the environment. But when I think about the people who are really good, it's the people who can just process a lot of information very, very quickly and react to it. And that's really the line in the sand. Like when you go from when you go from your original primary flight training and props to jets, you're basically doing all the exact same thing for the first few months. It's just 100 knots faster. And there are people who can't make that leap. You know what I mean? They can't. Their minds can't think that fast. So it's about that. It's about just being able to process information incredibly quickly and respond. And I don't know what that equates to outside of an airplane. You know what I mean? I always tell kids when they're starting flight school, hey, if you want to learn your emergency procedures, you know, do it when you drive. That's what I used to do. I would have flashcards, and when I'm driving on the highway, I'm going through the emergency procedures because I was like, this is the closest thing I can do to being in an airplane. So if I can memorize this and spit this out while I'm driving the car, it means it'll probably be closer to me being able to do it in the airplane. But I think just a lot of just, you know, putting the time in. I was in the simulator all the time in flight school. I was signed up for extra flights, extra sims. I wanted to practice. I wanted to get all the crappy stuff out on my own when I was practicing. So when I was with the instructor who was grading me, they were seeing the best I could give them. So I think it's just really being committed, putting the time in, because a lot of it's memorization. Like the more time you spend memorizing stuff on the ground, then it's just rote memory when you get in the airplane. You know what I mean? Then you're not exerting brain power trying to remember those things because they're just, you know them cold. So if you do that, like that helps obviously with being able to process quickly and multitask and get other things done at the same time.
Sure.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, very good answer. Can you provide any words of wisdom for young girls who really want to do something that's really challenging, or kind of join some organization or some occupation that's been, you know, traditionally been more male centric, and like being a fighter pilot, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell them the same thing. So I've got 3 kids. I've got 2 girls and a boy. They're all under the age of 9. It's so funny. If you talk to any of my children, like if they're going to try to do something, they'll be like, I want to go ride my bike up that really steep hill. And I'll be like, what do you got to do? And they'll say, believe in myself and try hard. And it's sort of like this, you know, it becomes a sort of cheesy thing, if you will. But really, that's my advice. Like, for whatever reason, I came out of the room and I was always a very confident person. Like I said, I had, like, little moments where I probably thought, is my best good enough? But, like, I believed in myself extensively. And the one time that I didn't was when I wasn't doing well. You know what I mean? And I saw the power of self-confidence, and I saw the power of not having it. And when my self-confidence wavered, that's when I started to perform badly. And the second I got my self-confidence back, I started to perform well again. So there is so much to be said for just believing that you can do it. And people say it all the time because it's true. Like, you've got to have that inner fortitude, that inner confidence to know that you can do it. And then you've got to be willing to put in the time. And you've got to just not listen to other people. Like I said, people only have the power you give them. And I think if you're trying to break into something there's not a lot of other women doing, you are going to hear those things. Even in 2020, I promise you, you're going to hear inappropriate remarks or someone telling you something or even saying something that isn't outwardly mean, but just like, well, good for you, little girl. You're doing that too. Like, when they're telling you that when you're 25, you know what I mean? That's not the right way to say good job. You know what I mean? So my point is, you're going to hear it. You have to decide what you're going to do with it when you do. And like, when I was young, it was very much like, you think I'm not going to do it? Watch me. Like, that was my mentality. Like, I will show you. You don't tell me what I can't do. Like, I'm going to tell you what I can do. So I think you've got to believe in yourself. You've got to put the time in. You got to work. You got to be willing to sacrifice. And you have to be able to recognize those short-term sacrifices make all the difference in your long-term dreams.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really interesting. Do you think your successes in your career and what it took to get where you are really helped? Well, I think you kind of answered this earlier, but in overcoming hardships and just things that just natural challenges that we all have on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, yeah.
I can imagine that what they put you through with the Naval Academy and flying itself probably had to have done that. And
yeah, no, 100%. Like, and it's funny. The perfect example is I've been working at Amazon for coming on 3 years, and I was on this pretty intense project. And people were just. It was running people through the loop. People were really stressed out. And my director, told my friend, she's like, everyone's always flipping out with Meagan. She's always just kind of positive and cool as a cucumber. Like, she's just, she's fine. And I'm like, this isn't stressful. I'll tell you, stressful. Stressful is a night trap after a 7.5-hour flight and, storming a thing in Baghdad. And, that's stressful. And, dealing with the pressures of being the only woman on the carrier that's a pilot, that's stressful. This isn't stressful. It gives you a lot of perspective on what's truly stressful. It gives you a lot of perspective on what are the things I control, what are the things I can't control, and how am I going to exert my energy worrying about them. So I know that I have a really good balance and a really good handling of stress and like how that affects me because of my time in the military, without question. And really from like not only flying fighters and doing just a hard part of, a hard facet of operations within the Navy, but also because I was the only woman. And there's just a lot of fortitude that comes with that. And a lot of growing up and a lot of maturing. Like I said, gosh, if I could go back now and do it all over again, and everyone says this, right? But with the knowledge I have now, I often question, what would that experience be like? Would it be just so much easier because I'm so much better at communicating and I know what battles to fight and I don't let people get under my skin anymore? Would it have been like a walk in the park, or would it still have been hard, I don't know. I feel like it'd be a lot easier. But yeah, I think that's the key thing to remember is when you're in those really hard times, when you're a young adult or in your 20s or in your teens, whenever it is, those things that are so hard that you're just like, oh my gosh, how am I getting through this? Just remember, not only are you going to get through it, but you are going to come out so much stronger than your side, and you're going to walk away with tools that you didn't have before. It's going to make the next obstacle so much easier to overcome.
That's true.
And I think it's powerful if you recognize it.
Yeah, it is. It's really a benefit. It's just, all of us, no matter how old you are, you go through that kind of stuff. You think, woe is me, but
totally.
You don't look at the, the actual benefit of it later on. You're right about that. And
right.
For sure.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the last question I have is, do you have any other personal philosophies you think would help other people, whether you're young people, old people, anybody, just to kind of get through life or become successful? Or
I'll tell you, I do speaking from time to time throughout the year, and there's a couple of things that I hit a home on. And the one thing that I learned without question, starting at my time at the Naval Academy, and was reinforced without question, but is my true north on all decisions in life, is it's all wrapped up in integrity. If you can look at yourself in the mirror at the end of the day and say, I feel really good about the decisions I made today. I feel really good about how I represented myself when no one was watching me. You know, if you're able to do that every day, the amount of joy and satisfaction and value you get out of your existence is exponential. Like there are things that have happened where I'm like, this didn't go the way I wanted it to go. But I look at the way other people behave, I look at the way I behave, and I say, you know what, I feel really good about how I handled it. You know, like I was kind, I was respectful, I stood up for myself, whatever it is. But I think doing the right thing and not lying and representing yourself appropriately, I just think that is a powerful thing. And I think if you get that right, it doesn't matter if you're talking about sports or work or family or friendships or like whatever it is. And I apologize for my dog attacking in the background. But that is, I just think I get so much, moving away from my dog. I'm very happy in my life. Like I feel very blessed and I have a really happy life. And so much of that is tied up in the fact that I feel really good about how I represent myself. And I like really instill that in my children. I'm like, we don't lie. We tell the truth. We're honest. We do the right thing. Like, you know, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody makes bad choices. Everybody messes up from time to time. That is not remotely unique to human beings. What's unique or like what defines you is what you do when that happens. Do you own up to it and do you say, oh, yes, I totally forgot to get that done, completely on me, and it won't happen again? Or do you lie? And it doesn't matter if it's a little lie, like that nobody else is ever going to know because you know. And like that makes a difference. And how you do things and how you represent yourself makes a difference. So I think that is the number one thing I always hit home with people is have integrity.